Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have the California Donor Table, and we have Ludovic Blain, who is the director, and we have Michael Gomez Daly, and Michael is the Senior Political Strategist. So welcome, guys.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So let's start with the basics. What is the California Donor Table? I know we've had you guys on before.
Sure. So California Donor Table has been around almost 20 years. We're focused on building a more progressive California by building the power of progressive communities of color. We align high net worth folks, wealthy folks, giving across tax status to elect progressives, to beat the bad guys, to support community organizations working on a variety of issues, environmental justice, criminal justice, immigrant protection, so many different issues. And we've been doing that around the state with some fantastic impacts and outcomes. So we're happy and proud of our work and glad to be here with you today.
And tell us about your program this year, Battleground California.
Yeah, so Battleground California started mid-23, and it was to provide a space for in-state organizations and national partners who were prioritizing or doing work in the battleground districts as a way to coordinate. Initially, it was a huge win for us that people were going to informally coordinate. What ended up happening is about 6 months later, everybody was like, let's make this a real thing. Let's start a super PAC around it. Let's raise dollars. Let's agree on plans and formalize the coordination. So in March of 2024, that's exactly what happened. We created a PAC. The partners serve as the governing board of that PAC. And we've been raising dollars to ensure that we can flip these battleground districts in California.
So tell us about what you're doing this year.
So like I mentioned earlier, the meetings have been happening for a long while. So it was about sharing programs, really figuring out together as a coalition what we believed was necessary to flip these districts, aligning a shared understanding of the values and the strategies to flip these districts, which is everybody has a shared understanding that what happened in 2022 with many of these districts, it was a lack of mobilization and a lack of participation is a reason why why these districts are currently held by conservative Republicans. It is because there's a large swath of the voting electorate in each of these districts who don't have an inspiring candidate or have reason to participate at the levels as some of their more conservative counterparts. And so for the past year, it was working on that, finding those values plans, and then working together to figure out, okay, who's taking what piece of the puzzle in each one of these districts. So if we know we need to knock on 70,000 doors in District 13, who in the coalition is going to take what percentage of those doors?
And we should share the Battleground California is rooted in communities of color in these districts. So Latino, API, Black organizations that have been working for 1, 2, 3 decades, rooted in these communities, for whom this is actually not their first, second, or third rodeo, because the road to the House has gone through California multiple times in the last since 2012, and actually House majorities were gained by the wins in these same regions, not these specific districts, but the districts next to these in the same regions. And many of the groups worked on those races in 2012, 2018, 2022, etc. So making sure to be able to connect the local people of color groups with the statewide people of color and white groups and the national organizations, both issue and constituency groups, labor, other organizations, and then having them all work together to have race by race plans where they're aligned is the unprecedented nature of Battleground. And since we're such a big state and we have so many races, it's probably true that given the number of races, even just if it was a state comprised of the number of contested seats, that would be one of the biggest states in the country. So so even though it's a minority of the state, because we're such a big state, 8 races is actually probably close to the size of Georgia. And so the coordination across all the races is actually a large scale piece of work.
Now, we were talking before we went on the air about just how crazy this year is. And the interesting thing is that we're recording this a couple of days after the assassination attempt. And by the time this thing runs, who knows what the world's going to look like? Who knows who the presidential candidate is going to be? I mean, talk about this environment right now and how unique it is.
Well, 5 minutes ago, a sitting senator was declared guilty by a jury, Bob Menendez. So we're 5 minutes away from that. um, and I guess if by the time you release this, the asteroid is coming, we should all address that. No, that was just a guess. So we are living in unprecedented times. Many of the individual things that are happening now have happened in the past, but it didn't all happen together. An explicitly anti-little d Democratic and fascist major party presidential candidate with the full backing of the entire party, a Supreme Court that is entirely, not unanimously, but beyond supermajority supporting of those efforts. The United States is no longer kind of the largest, strongest empire, so other countries are meddling in a variety of our politics, the way that America has done for centuries. Um, uh, Questions about the other major party presidential candidate. Um, so, uh, so lots of crazy stuff are happening all at the same time. We in California are not a presidential swing state. And while we have a contested Senate race between a Democrat and Republican, the outcome of that is pretty clear. So the role that California plays nationally is in our House races, which is why that's one of our focus areas. But also, our focus in general has been on building progressives up and down the ticket. And so the DA race in LA with George Gascon is key, as is, if we can do it, protecting Pamela Price, the Alameda County DA. The criminal justice backlash happening throughout the state is huge, and the extent to which many Democrats are running, I would say they were hiding, but they're actually not hiding. They're throwing other people under the bus. If they were just hiding, that would be better, but they're actually not hiding. They're throwing people under the bus. And as a native New Yorker, our in-state politics reminds me the most of when then Governor Mario Cuomo, the father, not the son, agreed to allow a secession vote of Staten Island, which was the widest, most Republican part of the city, to allow that vote on the same ballot as when the first Black mayor of New York City was running for re-election. And the additional turnout from the Staten Island secession vote is what beat David Dinkins and brought Rudy Giuliani into the national fore. So when we have folks like Gavin Newsom trying to throw Alameda County DA Pamela Price under the bus, there's some tactical political reasons why he's doing that. But the broad outcomes of that can be really huge. And Mario throwing David under the bus and helping Rudy had a huge national and international impacts. So I'm just hoping that our Democratic politicians can, in this blue state, can do better than the ones in that blue state did then. And that's the kind of work that we do at CDT, is working with communities to make sure our representation is better than, for the most part, what we have now, and then protecting the good folks from the backlash that they face when they are and do better.
So you brought up the Pamela Price recall, and the Vanguard has been following that pretty closely. We followed the DA's race a couple of years ago there closely. We recently talked with some of the folks there. What is your sense for what's going on in Oakland, and the chances that Price will get recalled?
I'd say that Oakland, which is about a quarter of the overall county of Alameda County, is suffering from the excess fascist donor overflow from San Francisco. That many of the donors who are actually national donors who happen to be in San Francisco, who have funded a lot of reactionary political and organizing work in San Francisco, and are in the process of taking over San Francisco. They've already recalled the DA there. They recalled the school board. They're heavily influencing the mayoral and board of supervisor races, etc. They are now investing in and throughout Alameda County. And people in Alameda, of which I am one, are not used to that scale of money playing in politics in the county, both the scale and the ideology, because we're talking about folks that are with Peter Thiel. We're talking about funders like Gary Tan who speak at Heritage Foundation events. So we're not talking about just moderate Democrats. We're talking about actual like pro-fascist, dyed-in-the-wool, anti-democratic little d folks. So they've been powering a lot of the recalls, whether it's of Pamela Price, of the Oakland Mayor Sheng Tao, attempted recalls of some of the city council members like Carol Fife and Nikki Bass, the president of the city council. So we've been working with a lot of community groups to push back on those recalls, to continue to make space for progressive governance, as DA Price says, to protect the win. It's important to remember, in order for there to be a recall, that means we won. We won those elections. So I want to just have us all say, progressives won those elections, and now the right is trying to recall, take us back. So we should, one, sit in the win, and then we need to protect our win. It's not somebody else's win, it's our win. So the efforts and the amount of money to be taking out DA Price are huge. They have funded a multiracial coalition of folks against her, including, homophobes, racists, sexists, all kind of folks. So it's a broad coalition of various fascists throughout Alameda County, and we're battling with them. So we're like currently battling with them. We hope that we can have a great outcome in the recall. It's going to take folks contributing their time, their energy, their money to it, and we're doing that. And it's in the context of all these other things happening. So we're hopeful that we can do it, and it's a big challenge with all the other things happening at the same time.
And can you speak to the fact that there has been this narrative, it goes back at least to the COVID times, where crime is out of control, crime is out of control, crime is out of control. And yet, if you actually look at the crime data, crime really isn't out of control. It kind of went up a little bit after COVID, and it's probably relatively easy to understand that you have a massive disruption to society. But also there's the fact that, 2020 was kind of, at least at the beginning, a 40, 50-year low in crime. There was a report that just came out last week from the Little Hoover Commission that looked at retail theft, which has been, a big deal. And one of the things that they noted in their report is that crime is, pretty much at a low, and it's been stable. And yet we have this perception, maybe it's because of all these videos of people running into stores and clearing the merchandise out, but there's this perception that doesn't really match reality. Michael, you want to jump on this
So
one?
I was just going to mention the little Hoover report. I think came out 5 days ago,
Yeah.
and they even released maps. I mean, they said one, we're on track with the rest of the states in the nation, so this isn't a blue state problem as folks are tying it into. But also, they did a map going county by county, and if you look at where there isn't a slight increase in reported shoplifting, it's not. It's actually there is some in LA and the Bay, but it's actually a majority of more the impoverished counties. So Central Valley, Inland California, those are where the slight increases are. And then if you look at non-residential burglary, it's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, to no surprise, I think for most of us who work in this movement is there hasn't been an increase since 2018. There was like a blip somewhere in there because of maybe, but we're on track with the rest of the nation. This isn't some anomaly that we're facing because of bad policies. So it was a really interesting report. But yeah, that's exactly what I was going to respond with was the Little Hoover Commission.
And then, that dovetails with all these shenanigans going on in Sacramento with respect to Prop 36. I mean, it just doesn't look good the way this whole thing has been rolled out.
Yeah, we're disappointed in the trajectory of criminal justice reform. We are experiencing the backlash of against our wins. The whole attempt to frame the San Francisco doom loop, and blue states are having tragic increases in crime, etc. And that it's being said not just by right wing and Republicans, but being parroted by too many Democrats and wielded as weapons by both of those groups against entirely Democratic Party reformers. That's the disappointing part. If you've been doing this long enough, this crime wave hysteria comes around American politics every 20 years or so. And so for me personally and professionally, it's sad to be back in this whirlpool or cesspool of bad data and cherry pick facts that get us away and actually going backwards from what actually works to make society and communities better.
So it seems to me, and I've been watching this for a long time as well, and I remember the 90s and everybody falling over themselves to pass things like 3 strikes and to show how tough on crime. And there was even a period of time where, the anti-death penalty portion of the country just kind of fell off the iceberg and disappeared. And we're not back to that yet, but it feels like it. We made a lot of progress last decade, and we're backsliding on this stuff. How do we turn that around again?
We've actually been running focus groups on all the initiatives, and we were doing a focus group in OC with Latino males, and it was interesting. All the respondents, the first thing they brought up when we were talking about 36 was 3 strikes. And one of the respondents even mentioned that 36 was actually the repeal of 3 strikes back the last time it was on the ballot. So there's so many similarities, not only with the names of the propositions, but also how folks feel about it. And tucked in this Pro 36 campaign is this new drug offense or rolling back some of the reformative policies we've had on criminalizing drug use and addiction. And I think folks can see through the negative effects that's going to have on it. And I hope we can lean in on that as Californians as we walk into November.
It was really interesting. I've gone to a couple of the pro Prop 36 press conferences, and they've done a good job of portraying themselves as being diverse and bipartisan and racially diverse and such. But when you get to the the crux of it, who are the people out in front, the elected officials? It's Greg Totten, who's the head of the DA's Association, former prosecutor. You had Summer, why am I forgetting her last name? The DA from San Diego. And they had Don Barnes, who is kind of the poster child for corrupt sheriff's departments out of Orange County. And then you see people like Dan Dow out of San Luis Obispo, Jeff Reisig out of my county and Yolo County. We were talking about Mike Hestrin earlier before we got on the air. I mean, it's the same folks. It's just they're a little bit more clever at packaging it this time.
And they also had money from big corporations to fund the early signature gathering, even though supposedly a lot of these corporations have backed off and agreed that what was passed, the legislative package that passed through Sacramento, is actually going to be far more effective on addressing retail crime than this would. But I can't help but think that some of this is tied into the battleground districts. Like there's nothing on the ballot that's going to incentivize the right conservative voters or far right conservative voters to participate. This can be a galvanizing issue, and I do think it is an existential threat to some of the battleground districts in California.
Now, Prop 36 itself is fairly modest. It's not a full rollback of Prop 47, which I found to be an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I do really think we have to look at this both in the reality that some folks on the right have specific policy goals that they're seeking to meet with these initiatives, and others are attempting to rile up an electorate so that they achieve their other broader policy goals. And they're willing to be incremental on policy in order to maximize their political outcomes. And we saw the right working to try to put all kinds of stuff on this ballot to stir up the pot, presumably mostly around the House races, although certainly having some outcomes region by region as well. So it's not surprising that they policy-wise bit off what they could chew, because actually the framing is entirely supportive of them. That the frame that they've been able to create, that too many, even again, Democratic elected officials are reinforcing, is, it's the Wild West. There's unprecedented crime, while again, all the data is that none of that is true. And so it then falls on the rest of us to not just debunk those lies, but actually, more importantly, state the truth enough times that people understand what the truth is.
That seems to be the hard part. Because I heard this in San Francisco a couple of years ago when they recalled Boudin. And I've heard it around Oakland as well. People saying, oh, it's never been this bad. I'm like, where were you 20, 30 years ago? Because like the crime was off the chart. Like as much as people complain about the murder rates going up in Oakland, like it's nothing compared to what it was in 1990. So there's that disconnect here.
Yeah, and when I think a chunk of it comes from the reporting, and when journalists parrot the lies of the retail stores saying that they're closing unexpectedly because of crime, while they have filed financial paperwork 1 or 2 years previously saying that they were going to be closing that business, and the filing happened under a previous elected official, but they blame the actual closing on the new elected official. Like that happens too often, and we've seen that in San Francisco, in Alameda, and in LA, especially wielded against the reformer DAs. It's atrocious, and part of it is we need better journalism who actually seeks the truth rather than parroting right-wing business talking points and I guess tracking down clickbait.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little reluctant to blame the journalists because I know, like, I was in the middle of the San Francisco fight on several things because we broke some pretty big stories. And I just felt like there was a big avalanche on top of us. And it didn't matter what was reported and how many of the claims were kind of, refuted. People didn't seem to care. And so it was very frustrating to be a journalist under those conditions because you just felt like, yeah, nobody cares about the truth. They just want their narrative.
Well, I think you all are honest and fair journalists, and I deeply appreciate that. What I will share is the number of folks who did mea culpas for their clear and obvious mistakes around the Boudin race, and while they were doing the same thing again around Pamela Price, like that was remarkable. So the number of articles I've read that, try to that blame Pamela Price for having crime in Alameda, but not Brooke Jenkins for crime in San Francisco. And then there's actually quite a few articles that try to blame crime in San Francisco on Pamela Price in Alameda, where they say, well, the car after it crashed was pointed at Alameda. It was in San Francisco, but it was pointed at Alameda. Then there was another article that said, well, the criminals were last seen driving towards Oakland. And then you realize, well, they were on the Bay Bridge. I mean, they could have been driving towards South Carolina. I mean, I don't know. Most states are on the other side of the Bay Bridge. So unless they were going to, even if you're going to Oregon or Washington, one of the two ways is you go across the Bay Bridge. So the chances that the car was last seen and you're correctly guessing it was going to Oakland, like that's a very low likelihood of all the cars on the Bay Bridge. So anyway, so I hear you that yes, it's not all journalists, but too many journalists are fomenting are part of fomenting these lies, and they have serious, individual and community and financial impacts. And so that's why we're vehemently against those.
And I'll be a little cynical. Part of what I see is just a lack of historical perspective that, if you look at the book 1984, and I'm going into hyperbole, right? But that there's the point where the bad guys switch to Oceania, and all the people are saying we've always been at war with Oceania, and wait, no, you were just at war with the other country. Now you're at war with Oceania, and it's like people literally forget that, okay, crime was really bad in Oakland and Alameda County, and even in 2020 it was worse in Oakland and Alameda County than in other places, and that didn't change when the DA changed. And so there's like I don't know, there's this disconnect, and I don't get where it comes from, why people just fall for this every single time, but it seems like they do.
Yeah, and that's why we fund strong community organizing, so that there's community-based, fact-based, data-driven, culturally relevant and rooted work happening across our huge nation state, so that people have a broader set of messengers that they can both listen to and also demand change with, right? Because it's not just a one-way, it can't be just a one-way street around the information people are consuming, but also then what they're doing about their desires for bettering their lives. And so keeping institutions honest is the goal of organizing and base building. And that's why we fund it.
All right, well, we're almost out of time. Michael, some closing thoughts?
I think you hit it on the head a little bit earlier when you were talking about it. These anti-47, like, one, this is not going to be it isn't what people think it is. And two, it's elected officials who are fomenting this undercurrent of divisiveness that I think is for the purpose of either ill-conceived keeping their seats or for the fact to keep some of these contested districts up and down the state in the inland California region, Inland Empire, red. And I think that's part of the strategy.
And Ludovic?
Together we've won lots. And keeping together, we can win more. And with all the uncertainty up and down the ticket and up and down society, together is the only way we're going to make it through. So so whoever's listening to this, do what you can together with your community and other folk to make things better, because it is there. We are the cavalry. There's no other cavalry. It's us. And so it's us. So let's keep doing what we're doing and do it more so we can win more and have a better society for us and our family and kids.
These are crazy times. And honestly, when this show airs in a few weeks, I don't know what the world's going to look like. I don't know who the presidential candidates will be. And that is a lot of uncertainty. And unfortunately, I don't see it changing anytime in the near future. We've been talking with the California Donor Table. They do amazing work. And we gave you just a small taste of that work today. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com.